let's talk more about what exactly it means to be Jewish. This is a confusing topic for someone who is part of American culture. There's so much issues in differentiating if a person is Jewish. Is it because of their ethnic background or is it because of their religion? Because if that's the case, someone who's 100% Northern European descent could just convert to Judaism and now they're Jewish. But then there's people who are actually Jewish that tell me comments all the time, well, no, it's not that easy. Not just anyone can so easily convert. And so here I am in the middle trying to sort it all out. And this is the newest challenging comment that I've got, and I love it, and I'm sharing it with everyone so we can continue this conversation. Our great friend Fab French, who is a very faithful follower, very faithful watcher and commenter of my videos, he commented on this video I made called "What Makes a Person More Jewish, DNA or Religion?" I love what he said. Here it is, quote, "Your mother is not Jewish and not even of Jewish descent. She just happens, as a woman of Southern Italian origins, shares some genetic markers that exist among populations of Eastern Mediterranean, Near Eastern origins. That obviously does not mean she's Jewish, which is a religion, nor even that she is descended from people that were once Jewish. Southern Italians and Eastern Mediterranean people do not descend from Hebrew people, but they both descend mostly from Near Eastern populations that moved in all around the Mediterranean and mixed with all European populations, bringing agriculture with them," end quote. So I'm taking that in, keeping in mind, if you're new here, I think it's important that I point this out. My mom has identified as half Italian and half Mexican her whole life. Even though she's born in America, her parents were born in America, but everything beyond that goes back to Italy and Mexico. So she identified as half Mexican, half Italian, and that's, of course, American lingo, because I understand that outside the United States, people don't talk about their ethnicity going back to nationalities. But in America, we do. That's how, culturally, that's the norm, how we talk about it. So her DNA test comes in. She's like, what? I think maybe 4% Italian, according to MyHeritage. But instead, she's like 15.2% Sephardic Jewish. So this whole time, I'm still believing, even now, that, okay, but that meant that of the actual Italian DNA, she got a little bit of that, but when you really break down the DNA, a lot of her DNA is Sephardic Jewish, Spanish Jewish. And I even want to think about, okay, ultimately, my mom's kind of like a Mexican Jewish person in a way. Like, in my mind, that's what I think, because her grandparents on their mother's side took a train from Michoacan, Mexico, and moved to Buffalo, New York. Her grandparents on her father's side came from a boat in Italy and moved to Kenosha, Wisconsin. And then those ended up, their children ended up being my grandparents on my mom's side. But this concept that none of that DNA is actually Jewish, that that's just genetic markers, that's all these DNA tests really are genetic representations of where we actually are. But if that's the case, it confuses me even more, because, well, do we say the same thing about Italian? Is there ultimately no such real thing as someone who is, like, had my mom, in theory, had her test show up as 50% Italian, okay, well, that would have totally made sense based on her being, for the fact that half of her grandparents came from Italy. But instead, there's such an instance much higher showing Sephardic Jewish compared to the Italian part. So is that really all this comes down to, is just genetic markers? And if that's the case, then, well, what about other things? Forget about Jewish. What about, let me just make up something that's very easily identified. What about Greek, for example? Is that a real thing? Does that exist? I mean, when we look at so many of these things that will show up on a MyHeritage test, they're modern day nations that we recognize. But some of these places are younger than the United States. So is it all just kind of up in the air? Is it all a little bit arbitrary and all a little bit fantasy? I think the answer is yes. And while I appreciate that comment, I'm being honest with you. In my mind, I'm still believing that about 15% of my mom's DNA is reflective, going back to the heritage, the ancestry of Spanish Jewish people. In my mind, I'm still there. I'm an open-minded enough person that I can be taught new things and accept new truths. I've learned so much since I've started this channel because of comments. But if I can be real and honest with you, I'm struggling with this belief right now. So help me through it. Keep teaching me so that I can become more intelligent by your comment right here.